Lockerbie thing.
Sure, I agree.
So good to see you. We're on the air now, so it's so good to see you. Welcome to the program. And I really like that thing you did the other day at the, at the Brecht Forum. It's a great institution in itself. And in the audience, welcome very, very much to Conversations. A pleasure to welcome to the series an old friend of mine and of the world, I would say, and that's being Sara Flounders. She's one of the co-directors at the International Action Center here in New York City, and she's also a director, I think, of the Stop War on Iran organization and so forth, two very noble institutions and causes. And Sara, welcome so much to Conversations.
Thank you so much, Harold.
So good to see you. We've been in touch with you over the years, and you've been in touch with Ramsey Clark. And I would, at the outset, like I said on a telephone conversation, I think the man deserves the Nobel Peace Prize hands down. And anyway, welcome very much, and welcome you to the program. Wonder if you could, why don't you just very quickly tick off International Action Center, and then we're going to want to talk about the current state of affairs in terms of American foreign policy and, a concept like imperialism and some of the arrogance of power that can be seen and that sort of thing. But could you share off a little bit the background, International Action Center, and then we're going to, of course, want to talk in detail about the Stop War on Iran activity you're involved in. But if you would, please.
Well, International Action Center has been involved in a host of campaigns, of struggles, of street actions, published many books, helped in the production of many videos and films and documentaries. We have a very active and actually probably one of the oldest political websites from the very beginning of the web. But we were formed in 1991.
91, really?
Really on the Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Attorney General, is a founder, and it was after the first U.S. Gulf War.
Right.
And it was the idea of having an organization here in the U.S. opposing U.S. militarism and war, racism and corporate greed. That is what we listed really as our purpose, to have an activist center in the U.S. which would look at U.S. policy and fight for change from below. And to do so by organizing, mobilizing people for action, and also to do it through as many forms of education. That's why I say the website, the fact sheets, the books, the videos, videos on YouTube, all of this is part of our efforts over the years.
Yeah, and you've been very effective in helping to organize really effective large demonstrations in Washington and in New York and other places across the country. You have outreach across the country, really, through the website.
Yeah, very much so. And there are other International Action Center chapters, and a lot of this is available on the website, IA Center.
Yeah, that IACENTER.
Right.
.org. Right. Okay, that's really good, and we're aware of that and everything. Interesting. 1991 it got started. I can remember that awful Gulf War, what they called the first Gulf War, and John Alpert and they started bombing. And if I remember, John Alpert and Ramsey Clark got on an airplane and went to Jordan or something, rented a car and drove to Baghdad and started shooting tape. I mean, they just started doing it and documented that, which I was so impressed with their just taking the reins or the bit in their mouth and going ahead in that, because it was such a horrible thing.
Well, it's one of those, right, it's one of those times where when the Pentagon, when unanimously Congress, when the White House, when all the powers of corporate America come together in a war, what happens is that in the U.S. media, overwhelmingly, you can't find even a breath of air of any large media that is not telling again and again and again the same story, the same lies, trying to line people up. This was also true in U.S. war on Afghanistan, U.S. occupation and war in Iraq today. It's true in the overthrow of the democratically elected government in Honduras. When the U.S. plays a real role, then there is a shutdown of any alternative information.
What is it that sets the pace where like I'm not sure what the term is, but like feeding frenzy or something, or a shift of where normally they would want to be, the press would want to be bringing up a nuance of ideas. Like leading up to that war, when you started International Action, there were huge numbers of people. There were marches in the street. There were huge numbers of intellectuals and even political leaders and so forth, many generals who were overwhelmingly against that. And in all of the media, leading media reports, television media reports primarily, leading up to that, it became one voice, and you heard nothing of the people who were in opposition to it. In general, that's a problem in terms of the media having a single fix on things, and seems to go along as though, you understand what I mean? And does it get worse at times when you're coming up to something, they're ginning up for a war, and the voices of opposition or of alternative is just simply not to be found?
That's exactly, in many ways, a purpose of the corporate media, which is overwhelmingly owned by and controlled in every sense, from its board to who's reporting to who gets the airtime, by the largest media contractors in the U.S., by General Electric and General Dynamics and a whole host. They're so linked in with the corporate media that in a time of war, they have only one story to tell. And it's true today. And you can see in a situation, which is true in 1991, it was true in 2003, where in every poll, despite wall-to-wall, 24/7 coverage for the war, the majority of the population was against the war. It means, to a certain extent, even while absorbing a great deal of the propaganda, there was a real resistance to the war. But the power of the media serves to isolate, for people to feel, well, I must be the only one thinking this. I must be alone on this. The ability to completely silence, give no coverage, no attention to the opposition, where you have hundreds of thousands of people in the streets again and again against a war, and they receive no coverage here. Now, in contradiction to that, you can see if the U.S. media wants to make a human rights cause célèbre, if they want to, if they're involved in an effort to overturn another country, well, then they can take a demonstration of 10 or 100 people and make it, give it front page coverage, promote it in a way that they never promote any of the efforts that are really for change, that are coming from the grassroots here. So that is part of marginalizing dissent.
Do they get together in that, or is there just a mindset that happens? Or are there meetings at some shadowy room somewhere where they do this? Or how does it come to be that they're so in lockstep, particularly when you get down to a question of crucial importance? And it probably happens in countries across the world. There are many countries where there's never even any thought of anything other than strictly state-run propaganda use of the media in all of its levels. But how does it happen that there gets to be, in the United States, where we claim to have a respect for diversity and so forth, and it's such a diverse country, that such could be the case? Is it the case equally in all media, from print to radio to television? Is it the same? Is it all in lockstep? And where are the voices outside of International Action Center, maybe some public access television or something, where a different standard resides, and how is that determined? What makes it so powerful?
Well, you're asking all kinds of questions.
Do you understand? What makes it so powerful that they can have such a claim upon the national attention and ability to manipulate the national consciousness?
I think in the lead up to any war or serious military action, there can be sometimes intense debate in the media, in Congress, on all different levels. Once the decision is made, once U.S. forces move, for example, once the bombing in Iraq started, whether in 91 or 2003.
But there was a lead up to that. There was a lead up to that.
Yes, but I'm saying then it becomes universal. There is a total shutdown of any kind of coverage of opposition. And you can see as I say, hundreds of thousands of people in the street, and not a line, not a bare mention of coverage. How is that possible? Because when corporate profit is at stake, when what is considered the interests of empire are at stake, then the very media that represents that falls into lockstep. And in one real sense, you could say every journalist, everyone on camera, every news assignment editor also knows that their very jobs and career and their ability to cover other kinds of news
and get access
and have access is dependent on them understanding a moment like that.
Now, when it would be the worst is when you had, like in the Second World War, when a country goes to war, all the things tend to go out, all the safeguards for diversity go out the window, patriotism comes in, the depicting of the enemy is in such stark terms that there's no possibility of understanding the other side, because there's a, what is it, the enemies at the gate mentality kicks in the human consciousness.
Well, back to empire and imperialism, because unless there's an understanding that this is the center of an empire, now in serious decline, the U.S. is the center of an empire, now in serious decline and decay, unable to carry out its will, whether in Afghanistan or in Iraq or whole parts of the world, and the infrastructure here really being gutted and millions of jobs being lost, and we're in the series of a pretty severe economic crisis.
I believe we are,
where there's a multi-trillion-dollar bailout of the banks, not of working people. But there's huge interests at stake in U.S. corporate control, not only here, but around the world. There are it's now, I think, 130 countries around the world where there are U.S. bases, U.S. forces in substantial numbers. When is that ever discussed in the media here?
I've quoted you in programs, Sara Flounders in programs telling me that as a stark reality and so forth. People find it hard to understand. But when you mean that, you don't mean, if I may, spell that out. That's worth doing. Iran is surrounded. And then fleets. And we have total control of the oceans. We have super subs. We have tridents. We have all kinds of things. It's complete. But that 130 nations out of what I think there's 192 nations in the world total, that's not just a Marine Guard at an embassy. That's a serious military presence that has meaning in terms of the geopolitical realities in 130 of the 192 countries in the world. That's a fact that you're sure of?
This is again and again and again. This is not a secret piece of information. There are more than 1,000 U.S. bases around the world, outside of the United States, and with that, and this is important to know, because even if it's one soldier, backed up by the might of the Pentagon, the U.S. military, the what are called status of forces agreements in many countries, which, for example, there was all this pressure on Iraq to sign to allow permanent U.S. military bases in Iraq. Now, this was publicized here while the U.S. forces are moving out of Iraqi cities. They're moving into these permanent bases, which are huge, which are really the size of cities, which have their own water and their own electrical and their own grid and all of that. So really, this is where policy is decided. And none of this is explained to the people here, the cost of this. When you have millions of people here who don't have jobs, and almost 50 million people who don't have health care, a huge prison population, all the problems of this country, it's never discussed in terms of the cost of maintaining this empire in place around the world. And really, I think the challenge is explaining U.S. policy and saying that this is not in the interests of poor or working people right here or anywhere around the world. At this level of militarism.
Could I bring up something in that? I mean, not to mention the Blackwater civilian contingent to our military forces, which I think are maybe larger than the actual military personnel that we have in those figures. It's a huge subcontracting of like Hessian mercenaries that are are able to be manipulated by the executive branch and so forth. But could I just take a historical view? Has it always been throughout a human history? It's a long history that goes way back, but there's always been empires. There's always been a ruling class of people who would rule, whether it was Hammurabi or Babylonia or Egypt or Rome or the kings of England in the dynastic state. The people, the mass of the people, are either manipulated or enslaved, rather like serfs on a feudal estate, to do the will of the few who rule and run this situation. Seems to me it's always been that way and continues.
Well, first of all, it hasn't always been that way.
When
it has been
not?
that way in recorded history. There were tens of thousands of years of more cooperative gathering and hunting societies that,
That's interesting.
That is much longer human history. But you could say, all right, for a couple of thousand or 3,000 years, this has been the human experience in
about
several
8,000,
societies.
10,000.
No, those weren't empires in the sense of today. But in today, and this is really an experience much more of the last 150 years, when you have a system that operates strictly for profit, and the bottom line is the only measure, not human needs, it becomes ruthless on a scale that is a dimension that we have not seen before in history. Poverty today is greater, and the gap between the super rich and most of the planet is greater than at any time in human history, much greater than in Egypt or in Rome or in past empires.
That's very.
You have 200 billionaires, mostly who live in the U.S., mostly who are U.S. citizens. 200, and they're worth more than half the population of the world. So when you talk about huge inequality, far greater than the Pharaoh or Roman empires, and when you talk about a large part of the world who today lives on less than $2 a day, and peasant economies being destroyed wholesale, and then for those in the cities, industry also being destroyed, wiped out, unless it can make profit. And if moving a plant out of Detroit or out of Pittsburgh
to China,
to China, to India, to Taiwan, to Thailand, to Pakistan, to many different parts of the world.
Any place they can exploit labor.
At a cheaper rate. It can be done, then it's done, and it happens overnight.
That's been happening in the more recent experience, particularly with the outsourcing able to be done. There must have been a revolution in transportation costs and so forth that made that possible.
There were huge changes in technology that made this possible. And those changes, now we can either accept this or we can say, well, just as humans have learned how to control in many ways communications and electricity and provide through agriculture, provide through all kinds of things, huge steps forward. We can also do that in social organization. That we don't need to have a system based absolutely on what is most profitable to a tiny handful and what leaves a large part of the world in starvation, and a large part of the population of this country with no future.
Much as 60% of the world is not well served by the system that's in place.
Well, far more than 60%.
More than 60%?
Absolutely.
You would say so, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say
you're
that
right, yeah.
This is
they're
supposedly
not served. They're not
that's
served.
Right. That's right. This country is supposedly the richest country, and yet you have a large part of this country who don't have health care, and even when they have and even when those who have health insurance, any serious illness and it's taken at a drop of a hat. You have, I think it's a third of children now who who never see a dentist, who a simple eye exam never happens in their childhood.
That's in the United States.
This is in the U.S., the richest country.
Yeah, and it's the concentration of wealth. There's two things, wealth and income, but wealth particularly is greater than it was, say, in Dickensian England or Louis XVI's France, Versailles, with all the aristos and so forth?
That's right.
More concentrated than that. And
the
we
wealth
know what
is
that
more
led
concentrated. You see, it's no longer an age of scarcity. Through
now,
a lot of
minute.
human history.
Wait 1 minute. That is such a huge concept. I wish you'd repeat that.
This is no longer an age of scarcity. Through most of human history, no matter how you measured it, there was not enough to go around. Famines and droughts couldn't be controlled. Today, there is a huge excess, not only of food, but of productive capacity.
Capability or capacity.
And depressions, recessions, economic crises are caused by too much goods. Goods that can't be sold at a profit. So what happens is they're just dumped. The system goes through real crises. And this is an absolutely insane, archaic system that is held in place through a giant military machine. And through a great deal of media control, saying this is the only possibility. And we, if we're going to think outside the box, if we're really going to think about what's possible, the same possibilities in technology exist in humans now, organizing themselves in a different way, not strictly for profit, as I say, for a handful.
Okay, I really appreciate your saying that because that is something that would be thought of by a great number of people, subconsciously or otherwise, to say that we have transcended scarcity in terms of an evolutionary pattern would be just accepted as sort of ipso facto absurd because 3/4 of the world is starving. So, I mean, how can you say that? But it's at the level of capability you're talking about. And if we
not only capability, it's at the level of what there is right now in warehouses and storehouses all over the planet.
That's interesting.
There is both the goods, and this is true from medical equipment and medicine to food to
knowledge,
the housing. Think of the several million people homeless in the U.S. today, and they say that 15% of the housing stock in the U.S. is sitting vacant. That doesn't mean it's abandoned. It means if it can't be sold at a profit right now because there's a housing crisis, it sits empty in the face of homelessness. Now that is a crazy, illogical system, a system that can't deliver.
Well, that's what I was saying. And this idea, you said it, that throughout all of human history, we lived in a condition of scarcity. And to say that Robert Wright's written a new interesting book on religion. He's written a very interesting, well thought out book called Non-Zero Sum back 10 years ago. Really good. And the idea that we lived in a time of scarcity and that for some reason, in historical terms, we reached a point where we were, in a certain sense, I don't know what terminology to use or how to describe it, we were transcending or overcoming scarcity in terms of the whole of the system. When did we cross that line? How can it be measured? Who has done studies that give some sort of validity to that monumental transformation? Because if that is the case, it's the most monumental transformation in the history of human society. 200,000 years we've been here, it would go back in history scarce. There's not enough. And we cross the line where scarcity no longer is ontologically correct. When did we cross that line? Was it in the 10th century? Was it in 1800? Was it in 1776? Was it in 2005? When was it that we crossed that line as a whole system that would make such a qualitative transformation part of the reality which could be taken into account by intellectuals and also by political leaders in terms of institutional structures? When did that transformation take place, and who has documented it most accurately, and where do we prepare to get that sense of that gigantic transformation?
Okay, right off the cuff, I don't have an answer for what year this happened.
Roughly, period.
I will say that in less than the past 100 years, in less than the last 100 years, or the turn of the last century, the ability of both agriculture and industry to produce more than was needed for everyone to live in comfort was certainly there.
When you say
that
everybody, you mean the whole world population. You're talking the world system. Okay, that's important.
I mean, in the 1920s and 30s, U.S. agriculture, even at that point, was estimated that it was sufficient to feed the world.
Yeah, right.
So, so that's sort of a well-known fact. What happens with a great deal?
Feeding is one part of transcending scarcity. Transcending scarcity has also to do with intellectual understanding what's going on in terms of the evolution of the universe.
Okay, the other transformation, I think, that has happened in terms of communication, because for most of human history, except for a handful of the rulers, the vast majority of the world didn't know what was happening outside their own village.
That's right.
They were not in touch with anyone that they couldn't directly speak to.
Right.
Nor did they even have an awareness.
Right.
Literacy was an unknown to 99% of the world. And all of that is now quite different. There's almost nowhere that you could travel today in Africa, in Asia, whether you're at the tip of India or anywhere in Africa or in Latin America, that even the poorest people don't
have a cell phone.
Have either a cell phone, have seen something on television, have a feeling of the rest of the world. And even, they say, small peasant farmers are now able to check global price of their grain, of their crops.
Yeah, that was on TV.
Now, that used to, you used to be dependent on the local landlord to tell you what you were worth, what you produced, what it was worth. That is no longer true. So it also means, and this is a problem that the U.S. empire faces today, that earlier empires had a population that had no concept beyond their own village. Today, when the U.S. military invades and occupies a country, the whole world knows about it. When you hear these estimates and this problem raised again and again about how the U.S. as an empire, U.S. imperialism, is hated around the world. What does that mean? It means, first of all, that it's known around the world.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And it's known by millions of people who don't have enough to eat, who don't have medical care, and yet know that in large parts of the world it's different, and that it could be different for them.
Yeah.
You see, so so that is a change that has taken place.
Right.
There are other changes that have taken place, and not only in literacy and technical knowledge and scientific knowledge, that mean that there are tens of millions of people who have the capacity. Doesn't mean that they're all employed, because there's millions of highly educated people unemployed also. But there are many people who have the capacity to solve the problems. What stops them is a capitalist system that produces only for profit, not the needs of providing full employment or health care. When that is not even part of the factor, when instead it's how to keep a military machine and a handful of banks in a profitable situation, when that becomes the only calculation, then life for the great majority of us suffers. And even people who say, okay, I have a job right now, it suffers in the distortions that happen in order to keep a system like this in place.
Well, okay, that's all. There's so many things that come up in what you say. I have a friend who was an investment banker and so forth, whose father was in the room with Norbert Wiener when they coined the term, about 1948, coined the term cyber, steersman, and they could see what was coming. And he used to say, information overload. If you have a system, you have a way of thinking system, you have an information overload within a subsystem, permits pattern recognition at a level that includes that system and that system and that system and that system that have locally been all seen independently and so forth, permits pattern recognition. And so what we can do is take recognition of a lot of patterns. And so you bring paradigm of paradigms or patterns of patterns, you can see. And the one sort of, and the thing that you said is, we've transcended scarcity.
Yes.
Now, there'd be a lot of details about that and why or what was it, how do you measure it, that sort of thing. But that would be a context. We're here 200,000 years, 10,000 generations, and there would have been a situation that for the vast majority of that time, we were in a particular zero-sum situation where in order for one group to gain, the others had to lose, and that you were in a condition of scarcity. And that's a pattern that is so huge in its implications in terms of the transformative moment in which we find ourselves. Do we live at a qualitatively transformative time that is not characterized? And we've inherited all these institutions out of a condition that's been changed fundamentally by historical evolution of new patterns of capability that in some come out to be, we have transcended at the level of our capability scarcity as a reality for the institutional structures we've inherited, so that we have all kinds of institutions that are reifying outdated historical periods in terms of what the future requires, and we're at a time of a qualitative transformation. It seems you study Marx and so forth. He seemed to be really, and Marxists seem to be able to accept the idea that we have transcended scarcity.
Right.
That's a
right.
huge, that's
it's
not
a
a little thing. That's not a little sub thing or anything. That's huge in terms of a pattern, and it never seems to be mentioned. If you were to bring it up to a geopolitical so-called realist or something, ipso facto absurd. We never can be enough. Human needs are so insatiable. Greed, the human nature is of a nature that you can never have enough because, do you understand what I'm saying? It's accepted in the public mind as something that's absurd, impossible, no point in even thinking about it. And let's reify the old institutions.
It's accepted because every society wants to reinforce itself. And this is a system and a society, capitalism itself is based on inequality and on convincing people this is the only way it can be.
Didn't they do the same in Rome? Didn't the emperors do the same?
Absolutely. That if you can convince people that they're naturally competitive, that this is a dog-eat-dog world, that it's unchangeable.
Right. It's human nature.
It's human nature. However, that's not the only way things happen. There are huge cataclysms that happen in human history again and again. Crises where the old system so completely doesn't work, is unable to provide that there's a breakthrough, both in consciousness and in what people are willing to live with any longer.
Probably has to do with
that's where there have been periods again and again in human history of revolutionary upheavals. And what is it? A huge number of people feel that the way things are is no longer acceptable.
Right.
And they begin to fundamentally challenge.
Yeah, the way things are not adequate to what the future requires, and we have to be relating to the future and the new realities that are emerging. Largely, I think it could be subsumed as through the technological extension of our productive capability, we were creating more. There was more, and we've done that. It seems to me the United States of America was seen as a bunch of bumpkins across the ocean when they set up in 1776 a system that questioned the legitimacy of the ancient regime, the principles by which the feudal Europe had been organized for 1,000 years after Rome, and they thought that was a revolution. They called George Washington a terrorist for questioning the legitimacy. So we now have a system in place in the world largely built upon the mythology of the inherent applicability of everything that was put down in the American experience from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution. We have a system in place. We have a system that has gauged adequately human nature. We fought for the good. We are in place. It's good for the ages. It's good for the world. We can impose our view of economic, social organization, political organization upon the world in an empire-like kind of way. And they call it the international community, and it is an international community of people who are subservient or obsequious to the model of the United States of America as the empire that is legitimate in a historical sense, and the United States of America is not legitimate in terms of what the future requires. We need a qualitative transformation, and there's no mention ever of that. We only just reify the outdated institutions, is what I'm getting at.
It's true if you look at it
comprehensively.
In a world saying, well, this won't change. Now, the problem is it's no longer working.
I think you're right.
The ability to impose solutions or to defend the lack of giving any solutions, that's what's in crisis.
Right.
And
the lack of vision.
It's not just a banking crisis now.
No.
The entire economic system.
The whole economic theory.
An enormous crisis. They can't control their system. It works only as long as there's enormous profit to be made. It's based on one speculative bubble after another. And more people in this society of greater and greater wealth have less and less. When they talk about the educational level today in the U.S. is actually now going down. It's not going up. In most of the world, it's going up. The level of health is actually going down. When they say that half of our youth today will have diabetes.
Really?
Well, it's a third of all youth. It's half of Black and Latino youth.
Right.
That shows a level of nutrition that is so poor. And yet, again, it's just one of those problems that could be solvable and is not in a system where everything is strictly for profit, from agribusiness to communication to technology to health industries.
What do we mean by profit? What is profit? I mean,
well, really, profit, you could say, is a stolen labor.
Now you have
of what people
adherence.
Produce. You get only a fraction back. A worker gets only a fraction back of what they produce, and that fraction that they get back is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and what they produce is greater and greater.
I saw the other day, my granddaddy was a labor organizer in New York, in Detroit and everything, but I saw the other day, I saw a thing, I don't know if it's true, but it was down, certainly it's only about 6% of the private sector is unionized, and unions are running out of steam. And I think it was only 12% of the labor force, including government, that has unions. So the old solidarity forever notions of labor being the interests of them, get the minimum wage up and all that kind of living wage, all that kind of thing, seems not to be resonating or something in the American society. And you said that you would adhere to, I guess, the Marxian view would, and in fact, I think all economic theory adheres to and at least set up the whole institutional structure of our societies around the world according to the labor theory of value. That would be that all, or the Marxists say surplus labor theory of value, that capital or capital assets are just congealed labor. Everything is created by labor, and that the interests of the labor should be, and it doesn't matter if it's Schumpeter or Van Hayek or Marx or Keynes or Friedman or anything. That's the way the societies are all set up. The income distribution to the people is done through their labor participation, through what they have a job. Lord Keynes said in 1930 that you're going to be confronted on a massive scale about the time of his grandchildren, about now, by technologically induced unemployment. The technology, the combine is a model. It's going to be able to turn out productive capability, but you're going to have unemployment. So that the only way we distribute income to the masses of the people outside of that small plutocratic class is through their labor participation, and the labor is being undercut historically. So the labor theory of value is out of date and should be questioned by the progressive community, and there ought to be an alternate way to distribute income or demand or buying power to the people other than their labor participation. What do we say to that? Or how do we deal with that?
The most important thing is to not look at it strictly from the point of view of the U.S.
No, I know, that's at the world scale. The world.
Right. This is now happening on a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem emanates from here. The problem emanates from here and a handful of West European countries.
Right.
You could also include Japan.
Right. The trilateralists.
Germany and France and Belgium.
No,
and
the
Britain.
whole world.
But it's held in place with archaic, repressive military system, and it is an economic system that's unable even to continue itself.
Right.
That's part of the problem of why there are these huge crises now on a global scale, huge economic crises where millions, hundreds of millions of people lose everything when they lose their job. They lose, or with peasants who lose their land, but on a world scale. And yet at the same time you have industries able to move quickly, easily, overnight, wherever they can make the highest rate of profit, meaning pay the lowest wages.
Well, labor is one component of production. Labor is one component. It's not everything labor.
Everything else also that is part of production is past labor that either made the machines or grew the crops or mined the raw materials or made the machines that pumped the oil and the gas and so on. So it's all labor in essence.
Right. That's all part of a labor theory of value. What I'm suggesting is that's the problem. Adhering to the labor theory of value, particularly by progressives, is the problem. That's what's getting in the way of having a critique that if a combine is producing a lot of wheat and so forth, and everybody has a piece of ownership of the combine, and they get income because they have a piece of ownership of the combine, then you could get supply and demand and the ability to clear the market by the people by relating them to the way things are being produced, and the labor input to production in comparison with everything else, capital instruments, is reducing to the vanishing point. And the holding to this idea that you're going to distribute income to serfs, like serfs in a feudal estate, by their labor, when it's all being done by other kinds of systems, is something that should be questioned by so-called progressives, and is accepted. And I think maybe that's the main problem, because the progressives haven't got a challenge that is equal to what the future requires. That's what I'm suggesting.
All right, I'm just saying that still what makes profit, what makes profit is still the exploitation of labor. The ability to pay workers less than what they produce, whether it is in the machines that are purchased or the goods that are sold. And that is part of the problem of capitalism on a world scale. It doesn't go away. The more that things are produced by machines, which is past labor.
Well, that last is an assumption. The machines have a productive capability of their own. You don't have to tie everything.
In order for the system to be
I'm trying to
profitable.
argue, in a sense, that that is the problem. That's the main problem confronting particularly progressives or people who want to critique the system, is they are holding on to an idea that is outdated, and it informs not just Marxists, it informs all economic theory.
I don't think the idea is outdated. I think the system we live under today is what is grossly outdated. Now, when you think of the last 20 years, when we were told would be transformative, that capitalism was triumphant, it was the only world system, and it would solve every problem. And in fact, it has done the opposite.
Absolutely.
It has led to a staggering decline in living standards around the world. And what is a decline in living standards? It means that the workers, in one way or another, the vast majority of the population of the world is actually being paid less of what they produce. When you privatize the health system and cut millions of people off of guaranteed health care, guaranteed education, guaranteed pensions, which is what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. People lost wholesale. All the things that were once accepted. Now, originally you asked me on to talk about Iran.
Yeah, Iran is there. That's right.
We kind of jumped all over the world. Yeah. But just to give an example.
But we got onto a bigger pattern than Iran.
Well,
is the transcendence of scarcity. And
what is it that the U.S.
And how what is
it that the U.S. government policy? What does corporate power want in Iran? They want control again of the oil resources, not just the oil. At one point, they controlled the exploration, the drilling, the production, the refining, the shipping, all of that. And at every stage, took an enormous cut of the profits.
Yeah, it was imperialism.
Left
it's
Iran
called
absolutely
imperialism.
Impoverished.
Yeah,
now, what did the Iranian Revolution do?
They overthrew
it didn't make a socialist society. There's still a whole level of capitalism.
Yeah.
But the oil industry, the oil and gas, were nationalized. And within a generation, it raised the standard of living, national health care, national full literacy. It made a monumental change.
Right.
What would a U.S. war do in Iran? The first purpose of it, such as we've seen in Iraq, is to absolutely destroy the ability of people to control their own resources and to put it back in the hands of Chevron, Exxon, Gulf, and Mobil,
that's all part of
an
imperialist thing.
Right.
And when you talk about the revolution,
so when you have a war, or when you have the constant beating of drums for one war after another, what is it an attempt to do? It's an attempt to reconquer parts of the globe. What was once the focus of the Cold War, an attempt to reconquer what were early socialist countries where there was some level of planned production. Not perfect, very underdeveloped countries, but some level of planned production. There was an effort to absolutely stop and destroy that. As an effort, it succeeded. U.S. has control of the resources of this whole part of the world, much to the misery of the population there. The living standards and life expectancy have actually declined substantially by years. Infant mortality has gone up. So when today there is attention on any reconquering of a country, why does Venezuela get targeted? Because they want to use their resources to improve the standard of living, the standard of health care, the housing, the literacy of the whole population. And they want to use their own resources to do so. And in terms of corporate profit here, that is not in the interests of some of the largest corporations. So whether it's Venezuela or Iran, they will create a whole hysteria. They will pose whoever is the leader of whatever country is targeted into a madman, into what's called demonization, evil incarnate.
That's
because that country is representing an effort to control their own resources. And this is the purpose of corporate media.
Which threatens the profits of the
if it's a threat,
imperialist leaders of the banking in banking circles in the Western world.
Now it's successful. It's successful for a time. It's not overwhelmingly successful. And back to the difference between today and 100 years ago and 200 years ago and past empires is today one of the changes of communication is that a whole part of the world now knows and can see some of this and organize at some level opposition. Is it enough opposition to stop the hand of the Pentagon as a war machine? Not yet. But that is when we say this is an empire that's now in decline and decay, it's impossible for it to provide for its own population, let alone be a force of change and improvement anywhere in the world. and instead it's more and more dependent on war and speculative bubbles. Now that is completely destructive. There's no future in that. There's no future in it.
And then you have people like, I saw Mr. Who on television the other day. And if you're talking in terms of, he got on there and he said, they got a new religion in China, it's called Marxism. They worship at the altar of Marx, and they say, we represent socialism and the benefit of the mass of the people of the world, whereas the capitalists have only exploited them and so forth. And China, modern China, and they won't allow any Confucian, any spiritual thought or anything to enter in to violate their sense of power by having a religious adherence to Karl Marx. And they do that, and it looks awfully like capitalism to me. You got gated communities, class difference growing tremendously, and that sort of thing. And it doesn't seem to be, to me, that the intellectuals of the world have been able to set a paradigm that is adequate to what the future requires. That's what I'm trying to say. Where is it coming?
They're very contradictory.
Noam Chomsky we can listen to Naomi Klein, a good critique of Friedman. There's that you can get, you can see.
There's very contradictory phenomena in countries all over the world. It's true for China. It's true in India. It's true here.
Everywhere there's a small group that controls the society.
Not everywhere.
With virtually no exception.
There have been huge revolutionary upheavals in countries that have broken the ability of U.S. or earlier British imperialism to have unfettered control of whole parts of the world. That is a big change. Is it the end of history, the end of the story? Of course not.
Fukuyama said it was.
This is all a world process that's in change.
Right.
I think for us, the real question today is, can we develop both an organized opposition to this system, to what it's doing here within the United States,
and the world,
and to what it's doing around the world.
Right, okay.
And very importantly, can we build people's movements here that understand the importance of solidarity with other efforts of people around the world to control their own resources, to control their own future?
Are we going to be able to build a world or put forth a paradigm from anywhere that is going to take advantage of this paradigm of paradigms, pattern recognition that you put out, that we have transcended scarcity? Is that ever going to be able to resonate, that there is enough in terms of the collective capability of providing for every human being with every need that they could want to realize their full potential, and the ecology? We have transcended a condition that was not possible in history. History is a nightmare. We've awoken from it. We have a capability, but we do not have systems that are going to allow us to do what we know we're capable of doing. That would be the stuff of a real people's movement against it, and that would have to include, it seems to me in the end, if you have non-zero sum, is different qualitatively than zero sum. And if you have non-zero sum, you would have to be presenting an alternative to the world society that would be not only liberating of the masses, for the first time in the history of mankind, in my view, but the ecology, for that matter, taking into account good design, but it would also have to be a pattern that could be so comprehensively appropriate to the evolution of consciousness in this part of the universe. We may be coming to the end of the human experience. The weapon systems are species lethal now, since about 1970.
All right, I'm not going to...
Okay, no,
we
but
could be hit by a flying comet too.
No, that's another issue. But the last part of it is, it would have to be something that's so comprehensively appropriate that it would be able to be understood by, in a halting way, by those responsible for the outdated paradigm and the outdated institutions, but in the end could go along with it, because one of the theories, or one of the luxuries of non-zero sum, is it's something that can include everybody rather than overthrowing somebody that has been the pattern out of history. And that's the luxury that we have in terms of the capability now, in a birth canal kind of a way relating to the future. But we don't have that coming from the intellectual community that could be inclusive of everybody in a way. They would be the last to see it. They'd be a lagging indicator. those who anchor us to history.
Things never happen all at once. Any breakthrough of an idea happens as just that sort of a few understanding something, and then as the system clearly doesn't work for more and more people, they understand their own capacity. But it also does take, it's not just a problem of awareness.
Right.
It does take turning over and getting rid of a system that is based absolutely on profit.
Could I make
saying in the same way that everything else in production is organized, that distribution could also be far more effectively organized. You know, today distribution is strictly for profit.
Right.
It's not in any way.
We didn't get a chance to develop the idea of profit. If profit is above your capital costs and your expansion, you want to make it, you want to expand, and it's something beyond the cost of doing.
I'm just saying that we have distribution, we have production and distribution strictly for profit.
Okay.
And in the, but nevertheless, it happens on a world scale.
Yeah, right.
If you could remove, and we're very capable of doing this, the profit question, then distribution could far more easily be for human need.
Well,
that would be actually simpler to organize.
We're out of time, unfortunately. We got to talk. We're all against the war in Iran. That's an absurd kind of thing that we have to avoid. And I thank you for doing that. And that's what we were going to talk about. It's a very interesting subject. I'm all off on Libya and so forth. I think they've got a pattern ahead of what the historical curve is and so forth. But the larger issue is that we're coming to a time of a qualitative transformation. We couldn't talk in any detail about profit, but what we are able to talk about is this thing that you put out, that we have transcended scarcity and that we're at a time of qualitative transformation that could be inclusive of everybody. So you're not going to overthrow that. You're going to be able to institute and coordinate with institutions like, for instance, private property, private ownership. There can be that. We're not going to overthrow that. They tried to do it in the Soviet Union and ended up with a terribly disastrous thing. They're going to be a thing to be able to anchor us to history. They'd be the last to go. But the intellectuals are falling down on the job in terms of providing theoretical.
You're saying all kinds of things here that
that's
I wouldn't necessarily
anyway,
agree with.
I'm terribly sorry. It's really interesting. We got off on all kinds of things as we want to do. Keep up all that really great, good work, and you write like an angel. It's really good. I read that stuff very carefully. And it's your pleasure to have had the perceptions of Sara Flounders, representative of the International Action Center, and also the key to Stop War on Iran, which is work that is very good, and I congratulate all of you, everybody over there, enormously on it, particularly Mr. Ramsey Clark, who, again, I would say, deserves the Nobel Prize for his critique and appropriate critique of the system which continues. I think we may be at a time of a qualitative transformation. Thanks for helping bring information that could help that to come about.
Thanks.
Your pleasure to have her perception. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Thanks a lot, Sarah, for coming in. Really good. Give my best to everybody.
Will do.
And we thank you for viewing. I'm sorry I got off on that, but I really think this is an incredible time to be alive after 210,000 generations when the weapons are Do you think the weapons are species lethal? If there was a guns of August released by the United States of America of their weapon systems, that it would be the end of our species through the weapons that exist now finally? Couldn't do it in the Second World War.
There's certainly that capacity.
You
but
think
in
so?
the same way,
species lethal.
There is the same capacity to transform this planet and make it healthy.
ChinatownKing@cs.com.